It costs $350 million, $2.5 billion to develop drugs. We can save 25% to 50% of that cost if you utilize AI and ML across each stage, so in discovery, preclinical development, and clinical development.
Welcome to Data and Biotech, a podcast from Cordi where we explore how companies leverage data to drive innovation in life sciences. Every 2 weeks, we sit down with an expert from the world of biotechnology to understand how they're using data science to solve technical challenges, streamline operations, and further innovation in their business. Here we go.
Mitra Mosharraf, welcome to the Data and Biotech podcast.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, just to kick us off, would you mind giving us an introduction to you and your background and what brings you to AAPS PharmSci 360?
Sure, I'll be happy to. My name is Mitra Mosharraf, and I work in drug development. I have more than 20 years of experience from the industry. I did my PhD in pharmaceutical sciences in Uppsala University in Sweden. I also did my MBA at MIT. So I worked with nanomedicine drug development and also protein formulation development and development of biologics. I worked for companies like Pharmacia and Pfizer in Sweden, and now I have my company HTD Biosystems, where we work with high throughput drug development. We are a CDMO in San Francisco Bay Area. Also co-founded a company called Engimota for development of lipid-based nano delivery systems for vaccines and immunotherapy. And I'm happy to be talking to you today.
Awesome. Well, I mean, you have an extensive background, so very excited to talk to you. One of the things that you've published research on is sort of like all the different applications of AI and ML to nanomedicines. But before we dive into sort of like applications of AI and ML, I would love to just hear from you for the audience who aren't like as closely affiliated with nanomedicines as you are. Could you just give an outline of, what nanomedicines are and how they're used in the pharmaceutical space?
Yeah, absolutely. Nanomedicines are drugs that are in the size range of 1 nanometer to 100 nanometer usually. That's at least how Britannica has defined them. And I think FDA and ISO, which is the industry standardization organization, has defined them as any drug delivery system based medicine that uses a component that is in that size range, 1 to 100 nanometers. So they're very, very small. They're very exciting because they can interact with cells in a specific way, which larger, components cannot do. So that's why we are very interested. They're like the smaller the particles, they have better retention time in the tissue, and they can interact with our immune cells in a different way. And they can, in terms of what we see with nanolipid particles, which are a type of nanomedicine, they can transfect cells, like when we put the payload inside them, like with COVID-19 vaccine by Pfizer and Moderna, we saw the mRNA that was delivered to immune cells that way by using lipid nanoparticles because they could transfect and deliver.
Right. So we've got this, relatively fast emerging, mode of delivering medicines to the body. It's already very big as a result of the COVID-19 vaccine, but also other therapeutic approaches. Can you maybe outline like why nanomedicine is so fast growing, or where like the fast growing areas are coming from?
Yeah, I think it's very important to see that in connection to other revolutions that are ongoing, like in gene editing and gene therapy, and also AI and ML. And I think these are all reasons that we can develop nanomedicines faster now and come up with nanomedicines that don't have the hurdles to get to market that we had previously, because we can now develop safer and less toxic nanomedicines with the lipid nanoparticles that are using ionizable lipids that are less toxic We can see that now with the mRNA-based vaccines for COVID, and also before that, the siRNA product that called Onpattro by Alnylam. That was another example that came actually out in 2018, the first mRNA-based vaccine. So I think this that we need a delivery system for bringing in products that use gene editing as a tool is very important, especially with the viral delivery system, which is for AAVs, which also we saw in J&J and AstraZeneca's vaccines. I think we saw how that could be useful gene delivery using viral delivery system. But I think the U.S. government recently gave a directive that's good to focus on non-viral delivery systems also, and do a lot of research for that because they have less immunogenicity and improve if you can give them multiple times rather than just once.
Yeah, so I mean, it sounds like toxicity and the safety were some of like the old challenges with nanomedicines. And so are there other challenges that you would point to that sort of like have stood in the way of the growth of nanomedicines over time? And I'm assuming that AI and ML are sort of helping to like overcome some of those challenges in terms of enabling.
Yes, like with liposomes and positively charged cationic lipids, that was one of the problems, right? Because they were more toxic since they could give, interact with immune cells in a different way, and we were afraid of cytokine storm. So using now AI and ML, we have been able to detect better ionizable lipids that can also, for cancer therapy, be used to target the nanolipid particles to other organs than lymph nodes, where they normally might go to, or if they are given IV, they might go to liver also. But a lot of research using AI and ML is being done to detect ionizable lipids that can direct the lipid nanoparticle to other organs, which is very, very important. And I think Agile platform is one of the platforms that I can mention that researchers are using to be able to do this kind of predictions.
Yeah, I think that would be great. So, I mean, you have this pharmaceutical research paper that like outlines all of the different applications of AI and ML to, help in bring nanomedicines to market and also ensure that they're successful. So I'm wondering if you could just, walk us through the different stages where AI and ML are being applied in nanomedicine, and then we'll dive in a little bit deeper to each stage afterward.
It costs $350 million to $2.5 billion to develop drugs. So you can just see how AI and ML can help us save costs, because there is a report by Wellcome Trust and BCG that came out, I think, in 2023, which it points out that we can save 25% to 50% of that cost if we utilize AI and ML across each stage. So in discovery, preclinical development, and clinical development.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, AI and ML are being used for the purposes of de-risking, of, reducing the cost of allowing these drugs to come to market faster and with lower resources utilized. If it's okay with you, I'd love to just talk about a little bit of the how underneath how AI and ML is being applied at each of these phases. So starting with discovery and early development in nanomedicine, what are some of the use cases or some of the methods that are being applied to reduce the cost or reduce the time that it takes to get drugs through that?
Yeah. So there are many companies that, especially I know that specifically large pharma, they are actually establishing their own data libraries to use as source of data to be able to evaluate all their historical data and also create experimental data to use in building predictive models to be able to discover novel molecules that can target different disease strategies, for cancer, for example, if they want to identify which molecule would bind to the receptors on the surface of cancer cells, or for the delivery systems, which lipids, as I mentioned earlier, is more useful, or which polymer for polymeric nanoparticles is more useful for targeting. So they look at the interaction between the molecules and cells from the molecular fingerprints that they identify first, and also for the delivery systems from the delivery particles fingerprints, which is what, for example, size, particle charge, and PDI, which is polydispersity index, because we want to make sure the critical quality attributes are identified and discovered, and put them in that discovery model so that we can see there what we need. So how changes in size might change which cells they are interacting with, and how changes in the composition can impact where they go in the body. How should we give it? Should we give it intravenously or intramuscular? Oral is more difficult now for biologics, but there is a lot of research being done in that field as well.
Right. So on the discovery side, what makes it sort of the determination of whether a nanomedicine is needed is dependent on sort of like where, when, and how the drug is going to reach like the particular tissues and sort of like the different molecules that it's going to interact with. And if I understand you correctly, AI and ML is helping to characterize sort of like where those interactions are going to occur, how strongly they're going to occur. Am I thinking about that right?
Yeah. I mean, it speeds up that, and also helps us from what we already know to detect, for example, which type of molecule might have better success rate, and also for repurposing of drugs. So sometimes we might have if we have a lot of historical data for drugs that already exist, if we want to repurpose them, so it can scan what is needed for a disease strategy, and then see, okay, what drugs are already available and how we can use them to address another disease now. So that's the drug repurposing. And with AlphaFold, for example, that got the Nobel, the founder, the designers of AlphaFold got the Nobel Prize, right, a few years ago. And that is a good example of how they developed this ML model that could predict protein structures from all the proteins that existed on the planet, and could come up with novel protein structures now and look at the interaction. So that has been a great example of how we can use IT, AI, and ML in discovery.
Yeah, I'm interested in, in the nanomedicine field, like, are there any examples of places where you can point to AI and ML, like really speeding up the discovery process? Or is that like, I know that like a lot of these companies are utilizing AI and ML to, as you put it, sort of like narrow the universe of candidates that they're selecting from, and also sort of test them, like they're testing them in silico, but I don't know that I have any examples to hand. So I'd love to hear if you have any.
Yes, so an example that comes to my mind is the Agile platform, which is a platform that has been developed by one of the companies, and to find ionizable lipids that are novel. And so it's an ML-based platform, and it speeds up that in discovery. So we can use that. And the other example is for mRNA, I think, finding like by which part or which mRNA would be more effective in the genome, to be able to find, or gene sequencing. Yeah, that's what comes to my mind.
Do you have a sense, especially in the discovery domain, of meta principles that people are applying that have them to like ensure that their models are less biased, or that they're covering more of the space that they need to cover in order to effectively characterize the phenomenon that they're trying to characterize?
I don't know if they cover more space than they should, but I think they are covering basically what they want to look at. They cannot just apply to another. Like if they look at a specific molecule, they cannot just say that would also apply to another molecule. So that's very important, to have diverse and large amount of data to prevent bias, and not to just apply your model to any other model. Like if you look at Proteins, I think we cannot just apply that. Can be applied to antibody drug conjugates, yes, to a certain extent, but not generalize it, right? Because then we need to validate the model again for even if there are small changes, so that we have been careful with that validation part before we draw a lot of conclusions. Otherwise, we might have the wrong predictions, and that would cost a lot of money.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And also, my understanding is that's one of the limitations of AlphaFold 2 and to a certain extent AlphaFold 3 is its ability to like characterize things like ADCs or any proteins that have like multiple proteins interacting simultaneously. Like it because that's not necessarily in the protein data bank that was used to predict it. So like understanding like the provenance of the data is really important for understanding how the model, like how well the model's going to do it.
Exactly. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there is a lot of resistance, I must tell you. I was just presenting about AI and ML in the conference, and a lot of people were resisting and they were objecting. And I felt for a second I was representative for ChatGPT there because they were saying ChatGPT lied, and there were so many things they were talking about that they were thinking AI is misleading them sometimes with the outcome. And I thought, but you have to pay attention to the model. How is it trained, and how did you validate it? Like, have to check, 2/3 of your data you have to use for training. And then what is the quality of that data that you use in the training? That's so important.
Yeah.
And that's the problem we saw with COVID-19 in the beginning for clinical trials, that the data maybe was not as diverse and did not reflect the minorities, because now I jumped from discovery to clinical trials, but I thought that's good to bring up that example. Because, for example, they did not include minorities in the design initially, because the historical data that was used maybe did not reflect that part of the population as well. And then in practice, they didn't notice that their simulations were missing that part, and then they adjusted it. And that shows the importance of diversity and to include minorities so that we don't have the overfitting problem.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And it's interesting to hear the story of you, sort of being this advocate for AI and ML and having pushback from the academic ecosystem about, but that there's this nuance there of, all models lie. It's just a matter of understanding where they're likely to lie to you, and sort of like how, based on how the models are constructed, and your ability to interact effectively with the model is directly proportional to your ability to understand the limitations of the model that you're working with based on the data that's used to train it. So
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've spent a long time on discovery. I would love to go on to manufacturing and development. Can you give me some sense of like where in like the manufacturing and development side, AI and ML is being applied in nanomedicines?
AI and ML in manufacturing are able to screen this large amount of data that is produced and find patterns that we couldn't maybe find ourselves with human eye, basically, and much faster. So, and help us with optimization of process parameters, which are so important because those impact the drug quality. And so always we have to make sure that the drug quality is maintained throughout different stages of manufacturing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and this is actually related to some of the work that we've done as well, like implementing systems that sort of capture all of the sensor data that's coming off of the machines, and then like use that to predict the quality attributes that are measured after the fact. Are there any organizations or any methodologies or any like examples that you found where companies are doing a really good job of this, and like some of the attributes that are coming off of the machines that are useful for this kind of prediction?
At HTD Biosystems, we have developed iFormulate, which is for formulation development. It's a platform that we have using UE to predict and optimize the lead formulation for development of biologics and nanomedicines. And also we can speed up formulation development from 6 months to 1 week. So it's very good. And we have seen a lot of good traction from the industry. there are also others, like I think Formulation AI is one of these platforms that can be used to predict the best formulation.
I would love to hear more about what are some of the parameters that are in the optimization problem in DOE, like how that goes. How do you reduce like defining a formulation like that from months to a single week?
Yeah, so we have identified a few variables that are important, like pH, ionic strength, and the concentration and type of sugar and buffer. So we have designed a DOE design that changes these variables in formulations, and then we measure the response by our high throughput technologies for protein formulation. And those are like looking at the maturation temperature and the biophysical stability, like aggregation. And then we do rank them. So when we do that, then we have 25 trials only, and a few of them are replicates. So, and then we rank them, and we look at the surface response, quadratic response, and based on that, we understand the design space and where in that design space we can find the optimized formulation. And then we select 3 lead formulations based on that. And we do accelerated stability study and stress the molecule a bit more. So based on those data, then we select a lead that we put on longer stabilities. Yeah, so it has really helped us help our clients a lot with accelerating their drug formulation development from months to weeks. And they use our data because we create all these very interesting graphs and DOE results for them in their IND application. And FDA usually loves that companies look at the design space, because then you can find the edge of failure and also know how, if you're a little bit shifting in your specifications, how that in that design space might impact the quality of your product.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So a company comes to you with a new medicine, with a new compound that they believe is sort of appropriate for nanomedicines, and you're doing this sort of like design space analysis, doing the entire DOE that looks at all of these different variables and sort of like characterizes the terrain of like where of the factors that are most important, things like, you know, the quality of the or the effectiveness of the drug, and then also the stability of the drug, and I'm assuming some other things as well, you know, solubility or something along those lines. And then, you know, in doing that, you can sort of help them to select like the optimal, like the optimal place, the optimal formulation that gives them like those parameters for their drug. But then also you get to draw a circle around that and say, you know, if you go down this area in the design space, then you're going to fail from an effectiveness perspective. If you go down this way, then you're going to fail from a solubility perspective. If you go down this way, you're going to fail from a toxicity perspective or whatever. Am I thinking about that right?
Yeah, exactly. You're thinking right about that. And this is very important to do in drug development, especially I think nowadays it's even applied in manufacturing, in lyophilization development. You can just change the process variables to find the optimized and robust models that can be applied across the stages.
Is there anything else on the manufacturing side that you would talk about from an AI or ML in nanomedicine's perspective?
Yeah, I think AI and ML also can find bottlenecks in the operation and help us allocate resources. And that is very important from cost and time perspective, and how much resources you need to allocate to the manufacturing process.
So in terms of finding bottlenecks in resources, should I think of that as like understanding, you know, where time is being spent in the process or where resources are being invested in the process? Or like, how do you set up the problem in terms of like optimizing like resource allocation?
Yeah, I think, you have to, of course, we have an engineering run first, right? Before even doing any phase 1 or any type of manufacturing. And during that engineering run, we look at different process parameters, and we look at how many FTEs we might need in different stages, on what resources we need to have, and we take time for how long it took. Did we assign the right time? Did we assign and then if we are at the same time having ML and AI look into this to see where we could have improved processes, I think that would be very helpful for us, and that's what we do. So we look at the bottlenecks are where the time was too long, right, and slow down the process. Maybe there were hold times. Maybe something happened during manufacturing, and then you have to see when you look at batch to batch how we can improve batch to batch consistency also, right? So it's not just based on one run, but engineering run was an example for one run, but you also need to look at your historical data to help you with that.
So, one of the things that we've done before is like create simulations of the manufacturing process in order to understand like which process steps are blocking the throughput. Is that what you're describing?
Yeah. For that, actually, I have done those simulations also when I was doing my executive MBA at MIT. We did a simulation for operation management, which was very, very useful to understand how many machines we need to have at each step, depending on the workflow that is coming, and the more workflow because sometimes the workflow is more, sometimes it's less. Now, in this example, and how to understand how many FTEs you need to assign to each stage of that workflow. Yeah, and this can also be applied in addition to manufacturing to hospital operation management, as you probably know. So in any kind of operation management, you have to see this different stages, how much equipment are you utilizing, and are they using all the time? Are they being used? So the bottom line is that 68% efficient, they have to be used 60% of time at least. But not 100%, so that they are not overwhelmed, but they're always used so that you can control the workflow. When it's more or when it's less, that's the best approach. The same with clinical supply management.
Yeah, interesting. So since we've stepped into the clinical domain, would you mind talking a little bit about like applications of AI and ML in like the clinical trials or the clinical development phase? How the different applications in particular for nanomedicines?
Yes, I'd be happy to. So for clinical trials, I think applications have helped a lot by patient recruitment, identification of clinical sites. I think during the COVID-19 trials, I heard that they could really find the disease hotspots, and based on those, understand where there's a higher probability of success for patient recruitment. Because some companies that didn't do that, they had much more difficulty finding and recruiting patients. I worked for a company once that couldn't find enough patients because they had before pandemic, because at that time nobody used AI and ML. People used to go with historically which sites they had used, which doctors they knew, and surveys that they would do with clinical sites. And I heard that later, for example, a company that used called Amgen used Atomic, a clinical site selection software to be able to speed up recruitment and patient recruitment also from 18 months to half. Yeah, it's sped up that much. And there is more than that. If you want me to expand on it,
please.
So for clinical trial design, it's been used, and for simulations of clinical trials to see the outcome. We discussed a little bit about this before, but in general, for data review and data management during COVID trials, I read somewhere that Pfizer used data query software, which saved data review time, and a process that would have taken 1 month could be done in 22 hours. I think I read it on their website.
That's reviewing the data that's coming out of the clinical trials for like accuracy, for to make sure that the trial is progressing the way it needs to be progressing.
This is data for the bioanalysis, and the data review. the results.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, in terms of recruitment, sort of my basic understanding of the recruitment technology is that you've got all of these electronic health records out there. You've got the data about the patient population that you can sort of understand about people who are likely to have particular diseases or problems that can be addressed by a clinical trial. And so you're sort of like searching the patient population for where patients are likely to be clustered, and then sort of recruiting sites in that area. Am I thinking about that right?
Yes, exactly. You're exactly thinking right. Also, clinicaltrials.gov is a very good resource to be able to see what historical data exists, the health records, patient health records. If we have access to them, like a lot of hospitals have access, but you have to think also about ethical issues and make sure you have the patient's approval to use those, and also the wearables that they use for like the Apple Watch and other wearables devices have helped us a lot with data, gathering data from patients, live data, and being able to use those data in simulations.
So what are some of the exciting applications of wearables that you've seen in for nanomedicines? I'm assuming inside of clinical trials. Like, are there what kind of information are you getting, and then how is the industry able to use that?
For wearable devices, I think it's more for compliance, like to see if patients are really using, for example, with diabetes, now that's not exactly an example of nanomedicine maybe, but the doctors can follow very well and see how the drug intake is impacting the health of the patients. But if the patient's not really taking the drug, you can also see that if you review those data. But in general, I know that hospitals are really using these to evaluate patients' health, and for clinical trials, also for compliance, I think is being used a lot. And also monitoring, like, what are the biomarkers like that are in, like, if the heart rate goes up or vitals of the patients, they can see all those together at the same time. And this is very important. And then being able to use those data in later modeling.
The entire data ecosystem is very interesting from the perspective of, we're always measuring like proxies or proxies of proxies of proxies for something like compliance, so like you can't really ask a patient whether they took the drug and trust that information. But, something like heart rate or temperature or, things like that, might not tell the full story of compliance. And so we have bioanalysis shops that are doing, much more intricate, experiments and measurements to try to understand what's happening. I'm just curious to, where do you see all of this converging at some point where like things like compliance or things like, bioanalysis can happen in closer to real time? Or do you think there's always going to be sort of this wall between what's happening with the patient while they're out in the world, and then the samples that need to be sort of shipped around and understood?
Yeah, I think that if it will change to better, because the way we will make drugs will change too. So as we go through this revolution, I can see that in the future, probably we don't even need to take the drugs. Maybe they would just be released inside our body when there is a need, by measuring with sensors exactly what's the concentration at each time inside our body, and when a release needs to happen, so like that can be completely automated. And it's a long-term strategy, but I think we will get there. And there are now a lot of companies that are working in implants to put in your body for slow release of drugs and when it's needed. But of course, depends on the strategy for each disease. So it might work for some diseases and not for the other ones.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I mean, it just highlights for me like the way that all of these problems are sort of being attacked from a variety of different angles.
There are so many different approaches, like with personalized medicine. there is a huge opportunity for AI and ML to be able to scan, each patient's biology and need. And we see that now in CAR T cell therapy or other aspects of cell therapy. And we will see more of that as we evolve more in gene therapy. But we have to be very careful with the risks also. Yes. And we have seen that some clinical trials, there were some withdrawals recently with gene therapy. So I think companies are understanding that they have to really carefully investigate and watch for pitfalls of not that those were not because of AI and ML. It
Right.
was just because of other reasons for viral delivery. That's why some non-viral delivery is important.
Yeah, right. And if I understand you correctly, like nanomedicines, one of the benefits is is the alternative to viral delivery, right?
The nanolipid particle parts of it, or polymeric nanoparticles. Yes, there are different types of nanoparticles that don't have the same risks, maybe, and can reduce our risks. And then combining those with AI and ML and being able to learn what are the problems and give those to the models, right? So that we can de-risk.
You've mentioned risk now in terms of sort of medical risk, but I'm interested in, across the entire landscape of AI and ML applications that we've talked about today, what do you view as some of the biggest risks to the application of AI and ML or its misuse in sort of the discovery, the development, the clinical application of AI and ML?
I think it's a major risk is if we don't evaluate the underlying data that is being used in the model. So that I think it's very important to put a lot of focus on that upfront and validate the model very well so that we can trust the data, right? Because we can have false positive, false negative, and we don't want that. And the problem with bias, as we discussed earlier, distribution shifts, which would mean, for example, if we are, for example, using AI for one sort of data, like for cells, can we now apply that to animals? No, we have to now develop a model for animals or expand our model so that it also has different species before we go to humans. So these are very important to consider in development to be able to trust the data, I think.
There's like the tantalizing possibility of AI and ML, reducing the cost or speeding up the timelines of bringing drugs to market, especially in a landscape where, as you put it at the beginning of the conversation, they take a very long time and they're very expensive, and the failure rate is very high. So if you can increase the failure rate, reduce the time, reduce the cost, then the economics of the entire industry improve. But then also being sort of held back by the generalizability of the models and the quality of the data that's available, and making sure that we're careful about like how we apply these models and sort of the assumptions that are built into them. So you can see how there's sort of like a tug of war between those two effects and how it manifests.
Oh yeah, if our model is a wrong model, we lose all that money that we have invested because we predicted wrong. So it's very important that the predictive model are predicting as correct as possible, and that is just done with that validation of the data and the model.
So, I mean, obviously regulators have a say in how AI and ML is applied. And, I know that the FDA is continuing to update its guidance on AI and drug development. What is your sense of sort of the direction that regulation is going? And then, if you have opinions, the direction that regulation should go in order to, enable the industry to be as impactful as it can be, and while maintaining, obviously, patient safety.
Yeah, I think FDA is doing its best to catch up with this revolution of AI and ML, and it does take time because they need to also. I read that they were applying AI and ML inside FDA also, and they had created a committee to oversee that work just for their own work also. But in 2025, they gave new additional guidelines. So now we have, I think, 5 guidelines that I have seen for AI and ML in manufacturing and also in development of biologics and nanomedicine as part of that. And so these are very good, but there is, of course, much more needed because there is no clear guideline. Like, how do we exactly like the standardization of protocols for using AI and ML? And I think they need also more feedback from industry, and this collaboration between data scientists, FDA, and the industry as a feedback loop will be very important for advancing those guidelines. And I hope that because this is quite a new field for everyone, I think that's why it's taking a little bit time to bring those standardized protocols out. But there are consortiums that have been formed and for data sharing, because we don't have a lot of data also, especially in nanomedicine. I think that's one of the hurdles, the shortage of data. So now those platforms that have been created to share data, I hope they can help also FDA and industry to come up with better guidelines.
Do you have any hopes for the protocols or the guidelines?
Yes.
That you would like to see?
What I would like to see, I mean, a lot of it also is like, how do you judge what is good? So they need to tell the industry exactly what is, what are things we need to look for in a model. Exactly, what should be the amount of data? What should be, when we say diversity in a specific model, what do we need for clinical trials, for discovery, for, so these are, I think, very important. Include in guidelines.
Right, that I can understand from their perspective, sort of like even experts in the field have difficulty defining what good looks like, because it's always relative. You can understand what's better, but understanding what is good enough, especially from a regulatory perspective, is a hard problem to solve.
We will get there, though. I have no doubt that we will get there, and because that's the way it is, we do have to develop standard operating procedure for everything, and AI and ML is part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could say the same thing about health outcomes. Like, what is risk? What do we consider to be safe, and what do we consider to be risky? So the ambiguity is across the entire ecosystem, and that's kind of their job, is to help cut through that ambiguity. So as we head toward the end of our conversation, I'm just interested in what in the next, 2 to 3 years is most exciting to you about the nanomedicine field, about applications for data science, AI, and ML in that field?
Yeah, I think that we are, I hope that we can improve our understanding of cancer and how to address cancer. That would be very important. It's like, if even now, if we look at the market for nanolipid particles, we see that we have now shifted from, even if initially it was for rare disease and infectious disease, like as vaccines, COVID-19 vaccines, now we see 33% of drugs that are in clinical trials for using mRNA LNP are for cancer therapy, which is very important. That tells us that if in the future we will have cancer therapy products that would use this kind of system, and in order to have more success and reduce their risk, of course, they would use AI and ML too, I think, for both identifying the targets and how to make those molecules and delivery systems, and automation across manufacturing, I think, would be also much more. Have you heard about those manufacturing processes in China? I heard there are whole making cars in dark without any people. I think maybe things like that will come to our field in pharmaceutical sciences and pharmaceutical industry as well. It's not good for the people, so I hope not everyone gets replaced, but I think the future labs will also not only be very automated, but you could sit in other countries and just access it virtually to do your experiments using automation. So that'll be very neat.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, obviously it takes away jobs, but it also increases the creative capacity for the human mind to consider what experiments to run and what things to build. And so that, as all things, there's benefits and drawbacks to the whole technological change. As you were talking, if it's okay to ask you one more question, we're hearing about all of the benefits of AI and ML to the biotech ecosystem at large and to nanomedicines in particular and the economy as a whole. But sort of measuring the effectiveness of AI and ML in realizing the value across the entire economy is really hard to do. I guess the question that I have is what do you say to people who are skeptical of sort of the value of applying AI and ML, in particular inside of the nanomedicine field?
Well, reports like the one I mentioned at the beginning by Wellcome Trust and BCG, they have looked at the impact that it would have on drug development and nanomedicine development. As part of that would not be different. And they're telling us 25% to 50% cost saving. That's important. And increasing the success rate, we already see that there are some clinical trials that are actually using AI and ML now, I heard. And that's important. So increasing success rate reduces risk of failure and also savings, cost saving. Those are very important impacts that AI and ML will have, apart from the being able to discover new molecules to address diseases we couldn't address before.
Well, Mitra, it's been a pleasure having you on today. I really appreciate the time. Where can listeners go to follow your work and learn more about you?
Well, I am in LinkedIn, so I hope that they can follow me on LinkedIn. We have also a company website. It's htdcorp.com. They can follow us on my company, HTD Biosystems, on LinkedIn as well. So, I am very happy to answer any questions if they ever reach me in any way.
Well, thank you again for joining. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I enjoy talking to you.
And that's it for this episode of Data in Biotech. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, rate, or leave a review in your podcast platform of choice. See you next time.